The coldest words she ever heard weren't screamed in anger, but spoken with a chilling, dismissive smirk. As a single tear traced a path through her carefully applied makeup, her husband, soon-to-be ex, leaned back in his expensive leather chair. "Tears, Clara. Really? What are you even crying for? You're getting more than you deserve for 15 years of doing nothing." He adjusted his ridiculously expensive Patek Philippe watch. Little did he know that single tear wasn't one of sadness, but of fire being forged. He thought he was closing a chapter on his boring domestic life. He had no idea he was witnessing the prologue to the rise of a titan. The conference room on the 48th floor of the prestigious law firm Blackwood & Finch felt like a mausoleum. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive wood polish, and unspoken animosity. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny and different witness to the methodical dismantling of a life. Clara Reed sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. Across the vast mahogany table, Richard Sterling, her husband of 15 years, exuded an aura of bored triumph. He was a man sculpted by ambition and arrogance. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and the smirk playing on his lips was a permanent fixture, a testament to a life lived without consequence. Beside him sat his lawyer, a shark in a pinstripe suit named Arthur Vance, who shuffled papers with a practiced predatory calm. Clara's own lawyer, Isabella "Izzy" Rossi, a friend since college and a firebrand in the courtroom, sat beside her, radiating a quiet fury. Izzy's pen tapped a staccato rhythm against her legal pad, the only sound betraying her frustration. "So we are in agreement," Arthur Vance stated, his voice a smooth baritone that slid over the tense silence. "Mr. Sterling will retain the primary residence in Greenwich, the Aspen Ski Lodge, the majority of the art collection, and his full stake in Sterling Capital Partners. Mrs. Reed will receive the smaller apartment in the city, the vehicle currently in her possession, and a one-time alimony payment of $500,000, along with a monthly stipend of $10,000 for a period of 24 months. Each word was a hammer blow, cracking the foundation of the world Clara had so carefully built. 15 years. 15 years of sacrificing her own burgeoning career in software engineering to support his. 15 years of hosting his business dinners, charming his clients, raising their 2 children who were now away at college, and managing a household that ran with the precision of a Swiss watch so he could focus on becoming the Wall Street titan he was today. All of it reduced to a city apartment and a 2-year countdown to financial uncertainty. "This is an insult," Izzy hissed, her voice low but sharp. Clara was an integral part of Richard's success. She was his partner in every sense of the word. Her intellectual and emotional labor built the platform from which he launched his entire career. Richard chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Intellectual labor, Izzy, please. Clara's great intellectual contribution was deciding between salmon and sea bass for dinner parties. Let's not be dramatic." The condescension in his voice was a physical thing, a slap that made Clara flinch. She had a master's degree from MIT, a mind that could once untangle complex algorithms with startling elegance. She'd put it all on hold for him, for their family, a choice she had made willingly out of love. A love he was now grinding into dust under the heel of his Italian leather shoe. "Richard, don't," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. He leaned forward, his blue eyes as cold and hard as glaciers. "Don't what, Clara?" "Don't state the facts. You haven't worked a real job in over a decade. What marketable skills do you possess?" "Planning a charity gala." "Your intellectual property is a collection of recipe cards and the gardener's phone number. This settlement is generous. It's a golden parachute back into a world you are completely unprepared for." It was the cruelty, the casual, deliberate cruelty, that finally broke her composure. A single hot tear escaped her eye and slid down her cheek. It felt like a betrayal, a sign of the weakness he so despised. And he saw it, and he saw. His smirk widened into a triumphant grin. "Oh, look at that," he said, gesturing with a manicured hand. "Tears. Are you actually crying?" What are you even crying for? You're getting $500,000 for doing nothing. Most people would kill for that kind of severance package." He leaned back, hooking his thumbs into his suspenders, a caricature of a Wall Street king. "Honestly, Clara, pull yourself together. It's unbecoming." The venom in his words was so potent it seemed to suck the air from the room. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her. He was rewriting their shared history to cast her as a freeloader, a decorative accessory he was now discarding for a newer model, Tiffany Vance Arthur's own niece, a 20-something Instagram influencer whose primary skill was pouting for selfies on private jets. Clara had seen the pictures, the blatant evidence of their affair that Richard hadn't even bothered to hide. Izzy placed a hand on Clara's arm. "Don't let him get to you." But it was too late. The dam of her composure had been breached. The hurt, the humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all washed over her. She thought of the late nights she'd spent helping him edit proposals, the brilliant business strategies she'd suggested that he'd later claimed as his own, the sacrifices she'd made without a second thought. All of it dismissed as nothing. "Just sign the papers, Clara," Richard said, his voice laced with impatience. "Let's end this farce. I have a tea time at 11. With a shaking hand, Clara picked up the pen. Its weight felt immense, a scepter of her own defeat. She looked at Richard, at the man she had once loved with every fiber of her being, and saw a complete stranger. A hollow man filled with nothing but greed and ego. She saw the ghost of the young, ambitious man she'd fallen for, and realized he had been dead for a very long time. She signed her name. The ink was as black as her despair. As she pushed the papers across the table, their gazes met one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, no flicker of shared memory, only cold, hard victory. He had won. He had taken everything and left her with the scraps. As she and Izzy stood to leave, Richard couldn't resist one final jab. "And Clara," he called out as she reached the door, "do try to be smart with that money. It's a lot more than you'll ever see again." The click of the door closing behind her was the sound of her old life ending. Walking down the marble-floored hallway, Clara felt a profound emptiness, a void where her future used to be. The tear he had mocked was dry on her cheek, but the fire it had ignited was just beginning to smolder. He thought he was leaving her with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving her with the one thing she hadn't had in 15 years' freedom, and a rage so pure it would become the fuel for a revolution he could never have imagined. The city apartment Richard had so generously allowed her to keep felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell. It was modern, sterile, and entirely devoid of the warmth and history of the Greenwich house she'd been exiled from. For 2 weeks, Clara moved through the space like a ghost, a specter haunting the life she used to know. The silence was the loudest thing in the apartment, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant symphony of city traffic. The $10,000 monthly stipend felt like a leash, a constant reminder of her dependency of Richard's final parting insult. Her days were a blur of numb routine. Waking up, staring at the ceiling, forcing herself to eat, and then staring out the window at a city that felt alien and hostile. Her friends called their voices, thick with pity, offering lunches and distractions she had no energy for. She was adrift in a sea of her own failure, the echoes of Richard's taunts. "What marketable skills do you possess?" playing on a torturous loop in her mind. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, desperate for anything to distract from the crushing weight of her own thoughts, she decided to tackle the last vestiges of her old life, a dozen dusty boxes that had been moved from the Greenwich attic. They were filled with artifacts from a forgotten era, her life before Richard. She sliced open the first box with a kitchen knife. Inside were old college textbooks, their pages filled with her neat, precise handwriting. Advanced data structures, quantum computing theory, algorithmic design. Names that once thrilled her now seemed like a foreign language. She ran her fingers over the titles, a flicker of a long-forgotten person stirring within her. The girl who coded for fun. The girl who saw the world as a series of elegant problems waiting for equally elegant solutions. Where had that girl gone? Deeper in the box beneath a faded MIT sweatshirt was a worn, leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a single word, synapse. Her breath caught in her throat. She pulled it out, the leather cool against her fingertips. She hadn't thought about synapse in almost 2 decades. It was her senior thesis project, her passion, her baby, an obsession that had consumed her final year at MIT. She'd been working on a revolutionary data compression algorithm, one that didn't just shrink file sizes but learned and anticipated data patterns to achieve a level of efficiency that was at the time purely theoretical. She had called it a predictive neural compression model. She called it Synapse because it was designed to mimic the way the human brain prunes unimportant information and strengthens vital connections. She opened the journal. The pages were filled with complex equations, flowcharts, and lines of a programming language she had co-developed for the project. Her handwriting was a frantic, excited scrawl, the notes of a mind working faster than the pen could keep up. She remembered the sleepless nights fueled by coffee and ambition, the thrill of a breakthrough, the sheer unadulterated joy of creation. Richard had hated it. He was in his first year at Harvard Business School then, and he saw her project as a distraction. "Clara, it's a cute academic exercise," he'd said one evening, glancing at her wall of whiteboards covered in code. "But in the real world, people care about profits, not elegant little algorithms. You need to focus on networking, on making the right connections." She had defended her work fiercely then, but after they got married, his voice became the dominant one in her head. Her work was a hobby. Her ambition was unnecessary. His career was paramount. And so Synapse, along with her dreams, was packed away in a box and relegated to the attic. As she turned the pages, a wave of profound, gut-wrenching grief washed over her. It wasn't for Richard. It was for herself. For the brilliant, passionate young woman she had abandoned. Richard hadn't just taken her house and her money. He had, piece by piece, dismantled her very identity until all that was left was Mrs. Richard Sterling. She found a folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover of the journal. It was a formal-looking document, a licensing agreement. She vaguely remembered signing it. Her thesis advisor, a brilliant but eccentric professor named Dr. Eris Thorne, had urged her to. He had seen the immense potential in her work. "You can't just let this die in a library archive, Clara," he had insisted. "Let's put it out there even in a small way. A tiny tech incubator, a startup I know, they could use this as a foundational patent. It won't make you rich, but it will keep the idea alive." The agreement was with a company she barely remembered, Chrysalis Innovations. They had licensed the core algorithm for a nominal fee, something like $1,000, which had seemed like a fortune to her at the time. The terms were simple. They had the right to develop the technology, and she retained a small percentage of ownership in the foundational patent itself. She recalled Richard laughing at it. $1,000 for your magnum opus. See, I told you it was just a college game." She had believed him. She had filed the paperwork away and forgotten all about it. Now, sitting on the floor of her empty apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, a new feeling began to push through the fog of despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was curiosity. A spark. What had ever happened to Chrysalis Innovations? To her algorithm? To Dr. Thorne? On a whim, driven by a need to connect with the person she used to be, she pulled out her laptop. The sleek silver machine was a gift from Richard meant for online shopping and managing social calendars. Now, for the first time in years, she was going to use it for something else. Her fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard as she typed Dr. Eris Thorne into the search bar. The results came up instantly. He was still at MIT now, the head of the Department of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science. He was a luminary in the field, a celebrated pioneer. Her heart pounded in her chest. Would he even remember her, Clara Reed, his promising student from nearly 20 years ago? She scrolled through the department website until she found his official email address. Her hands shook as she composed a short, simple message. Subject A. Former student, Clara Reed, formerly Bellwether. Dear Dr. Thorne. You may not remember me, but I was a student of yours back in 2005. I've been going through some old things and came across my senior thesis, the Synapse Project. I was just feeling a bit nostalgic and wanted to reach out and thank you again for all your guidance and encouragement back then. It meant the world to me. I hope you are well. Sincerely, Clara Reed. She stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over the send button. It felt foolish, a desperate grasp at a past that no longer existed. Richard's voice echoed in her head, mocking her. What are you doing? Reliving your glory days. Pathetic. She clicked send anyway. It was a small act of rebellion, a tiny signal sent out into the universe from a life that had been put on hold. She didn't expect a reply. She certainly didn't expect that single email sent from a place of lonely nostalgia would be the catalyst that would set the entire world on fire. 3 days passed. The email to Dr. Thorne faded into the background noise of Clara's quiet despair. She assumed it had been lost in the digital ether, or worse, seen and ignored by a busy academic with no time for ghosts from his past. She began to regret sending it, feeling the familiar sting of foolishness that Richard had so expertly conditioned her to feel. On Friday afternoon, as she was listlessly stirring a pot of soup she had no intention of eating, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The area code was for Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her heart skipped a beat. She almost didn't answer, her anxiety spiking, but some new defiant instinct made her press the green button. "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Clara Bellwether. Is that you? My God, it's Heiress Thorne." The voice was exactly as she remembered, a booming, enthusiastic baritone crackling with intellectual energy. It was a voice from another lifetime. "Dr. Thorne," she breathed, sinking onto a kitchen stool. I can't believe you called. I wasn't expecting. Clara, your email was like a flare in the night. I've tried to find you a half-dozen times over the years, but you seem to have dropped off the face of the earth. Reed, you said your name is Now. Of course you got married. How have you been? What have you been working on? Are you still in the field? The rapid-fire questions were overwhelming. How could she possibly answer? Well, I got married, gave up my entire career, was systematically stripped of my confidence, and just got divorced by the man who told me my life's work was a cute little game. How about you? It's a long story. She managed her voice thick with emotion. I haven't been in the field for a while. I'm in a period of transition right now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Thorne, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the weight behind her words. "Ah," he said, his tone softening. "Well, whatever you've been doing, I hope the world has been good to you. You had one of the most brilliant minds I ever had the privilege of teaching." The compliment, so genuine and unexpected, hit her like a physical blow. It was water on a desert, a nutrient she hadn't realized she was starving for. She had to swallow hard to keep from crying. "You mentioned Synapse in your email," he continued, his voice regaining its excitement. "Clara, you have no idea. You have no idea what you started." "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I assumed it just fizzled out with that little incubator chrysalis." Dr. Thorne let out a booming laugh. "Fizzled out, Clara, chrysalis. Innovations was acquired about 12 years ago by a mid-level data logistics company called Logicor. They were smart enough to know what they had, but not big enough to scale it. They spent a decade quietly refining your algorithm, building a massive framework around your predictive compression model. They used it to revolutionize supply chain management, creating a system that could predict market needs and reroute global shipping in real time. They renamed the core system Helios, but at its heart, it's still Synapse. It's your digital DNA. Clara felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. They've been running it in a closed system, a fiercely guarded trade secret. But secrets like that don't last forever. In the last year, a few major players have gotten wind of what Helios can do, and one of them, the biggest shark in the ocean, is circling. Who? Clara whispered, her grip on the phone tightening. Nexus Corp. The name landed with the force of an anvil. Nexus Corp wasn't just a tech company. It was a global behemoth. They were into everything cloud computing, AI, e-commerce, space exploration. Their CEO, a man named Kalen Vance, was a household name, a modern-day Midas, whose touch turned everything to gold. Nexus wants to acquire Logicor. Dr. Thorne explained, his voice low and urgent. Not for their clients or their infrastructure. They want Helios. They want your algorithm. An acquisition of this magnitude involves intense due diligence. Lawyers started digging into Logicor's foundational patents, and they traced Helios all the way back to its source. To a senior thesis from MIT. To Patent 7894561B2. To you, Clara. The room began to spin. Clara put a hand on the counter to steady herself. My patent. But that was just a small percentage. Clara, Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. That small percentage was on the foundational patent. Everything Logicor built, every line of code in the Helios system, is legally considered a derivative work. Your little slice of the pie isn't a slice of the original $1,000 seed. It's a slice of the entire goddamn tree. Logicor's lawyers have been trying to reach you for 6 months. The letters were likely going to your old address, the one I didn't have. My old address, Clara stammered, thinking of the Greenwich house. Richard probably saw the letters, marked them as junk mail from some obscure tech company, and had them incinerated without a second thought. The irony was so thick she could barely breathe. What does this mean? She asked, her mind struggling to process the flood of information. It means Nexus Corp can't complete the acquisition without the original patent holder signing off. It means, Clara, that you are the linchpin in a multi-billion-dollar deal. Your signature is the final key. The soup on the stove began to boil over, hissing as it hit the hot burner, but Clara didn't notice. The sterile apartment, the city noise, her own despair, it all faded away. All she could hear was the frantic, triumphant pounding of her own heart. They're having a preliminary meeting in New York next week, Dr. Thorne continued. The CEO of Logicor, Robert Chen, and the head of acquisitions from Nexus, a real killer named Cassandra Hayes. Robert's lawyers finally tracked me down, hoping I knew how to find you. Clara, you need to be in that room, but you cannot go in alone. These people eat people like us for breakfast. A vision of Richard flashed in her mind, sitting across the mahogany table smirking. What marketable skills do you possess? A slow, dangerous smile spread across Clara's face. It was the first genuine smile in months. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice no longer trembling but infused with a steel she hadn't felt in years. Can you send me everything you have on this, every document, every email, and I know just the lawyer to bring. She ended the call and immediately dialed Izzy. Izzy, she said the moment her friend picked up. Cancel your plans for the next 2 weeks. We're going to war. The week that followed was a whirlwind, a trial by fire that forged a new Clara Reed from the ashes of the old. The quiet, sterile apartment transformed into a bustling war room. Izzy, upon hearing the full story, had reacted with a stunned silence, followed by a string of curses, and then a whoop of fierce, unadulterated joy. She moved in, practically turning the minimalist living room into a command center littered with documents, laptops, and takeout containers. Dr. Thorne, true to his word, had overnighted a package containing every piece of correspondence and technical analysis he had. Clara and Izzy spent 2 straight days devouring the information. For Clara, it was like waking a dormant part of her brain. Reading through the technical specs of the Helios system, she saw the ghost of her original Synapse algorithm everywhere. They had scaled it, polished it, and wrapped it in a $1 trillion shell, but the core logic, her logic, was unmistakable. The girl who once filled whiteboards with frantic code was reawakening her mind, firing on all cylinders. They've expanded the predictive matrix, she muttered one evening, pointing at a complex flowchart. But the core heuristic is still mine. See the way it prunes low-probability data strings. That's my signature." Izzy, while not understanding the technical nuances, understood the legal implications perfectly. "Your signature is about to be worth more than the GDP of a small country," she said, her eyes gleaming. "This is beautiful, Clara. Absolutely beautiful. The premarital asset clause in your divorce settlement is our fortress." Richard defined anything from before the marriage as separate property. He was so eager to protect his own meager premarital savings that he inadvertently built a legal wall around your billion-dollar baby. They hired a team of the best patent and M&A lawyers in the country, a firm Izzy had long admired, Cohen, Stern and Associates. The initial consultation was a revelation. When Clara, quiet and unassuming, began to deconstruct the Helios system for the senior partner, a legendary litigator named Samuel Stern, the man's eyebrows rose higher and higher. "Ms. Reed," he said after she had finished, a look of profound respect on his face, "you're not just the patent holder. You understand this technology better than the people who have been developing it for the last decade. This changes the entire negotiation." The power dynamic in the room had shifted. Clara wasn't just a victim with a lucky lottery ticket. She was an expert, an asset. Her voice, once hesitant, grew stronger with every meeting. She was no longer just Mrs. Richard Sterling. She was Clara Reed, the architect of Synapse. While Clara was rediscovering her intellectual power, she was also undergoing a physical transformation. Izzy insisted on it. "We're not walking into that boardroom looking like a victim," she declared, dragging Clara out of the apartment. "We are walking in there looking like the two women who own the place." They went to Bergdorf Goodman, not with Richard's money, but with a line of credit Izzy secured against the future settlement. Clara, who had spent 15 years dressing in the tasteful, conservative country club chic that Richard approved of, found herself being zipped into a sharp slate-gray Armani power suit. It fit her perfectly, the clean lines and structured shoulders making her stand taller. She looked at her reflection in the three-way mirror and saw a stranger, a confident, formidable woman she barely recognized. They bought 3 more outfits just like it, a uniform for her new life. A trip to a top salon followed, where her sensible shoulder-length hair was cut into a chic razor-sharp bob that framed her face and highlighted the intelligence in her eyes. The change wasn't just aesthetic, it was psychological. With each piece of her old life she shed, she felt lighter, stronger. The generous $10,000 stipend from Richard arrived in her bank account, and for the first time she laughed at it. It was a joke, a pittance from a man who had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was living his best life, and he wanted the world to know it. His Instagram was a curated gallery of his success. A picture of him and Tiffany on a yacht in St. Bart's, her arm draped around him, a massive diamond on her finger. A shot of his new McLaren gleaming in the driveway of the Greenwich house. The captions were nauseatingly smug, starting a new chapter with "the one who truly gets me." "Leveling up in every way." Izzy showed Clara one of the posts. "Look at this clown," she scoffed. Clara looked at the photo of Richard, his face tanned, his smile wide and self-satisfied. A few weeks ago it would have sent a spear of pain through her heart. Now she felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. He was a man trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, chasing validation through material things. He was playing checkers while she was about to overturn the entire chessboard. The day of the meeting arrived. It was a crisp, clear morning. Clara stood before the mirror in her new apartment, dressed in her Armani armor. She looked at her reflection, at the sharp haircut, the determined set of her jaw. The woman staring back at her was not the weeping, broken person from the Blackwood and Finch conference room. This was someone new, someone forged. Izzy stood beside her, adjusting her own blazer. "Ready?" Clara took a deep breath. "Richard once told me my greatest skill was choosing the right wine for a dinner party." "Well," Izzy said with a grin, "today you're not choosing the wine. You're buying the whole damn vineyard." They walked out of the apartment and into a waiting town car. Their destination, the gleaming obsidian tower in Midtown that housed the New York offices of Nexus Corp. As the car slid through the city traffic, Clara looked out at the canyons of steel and glass. For the first time since the divorce, the city didn't feel hostile or alien. It felt like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. She was no longer a ghost haunting someone else's life. She was an architect about to draw the blueprints for her own. The Nexus Corp boardroom was designed to intimidate. Located on the 80th floor, it offered a panoramic, godlike view of Manhattan. The table was a single massive slab of polished black granite that seemed to absorb all light and sound. At one end sat Robert Chen, the CEO of Logicor, a man in his late 60s with tired, anxious eyes. He was flanked by his legal team, who looked equally nervous. At the other end, holding court, was Cassandra Hayes, Nexus Corp's legendary head of mergers and acquisitions. She was a woman in her 40s with piercing gray eyes and an aura of absolute control. Her reputation preceded her. They called her the Shark for her ability to smell blood in the water from miles away. When Clara Izzy and Samuel Stern walked in, a ripple of confusion went through the room. They were expecting a meeting between Logicor and Nexus. They weren't expecting a third party. Cassandra Robert. Samuel Stern said, his voice calm and authoritative. Thank you for accommodating us. This is Clara Reed, the principal stakeholder in the foundational patent for the Helios system, and this is her personal counsel, Isabella Rossi. We're here to ensure Miss Reed's interests are properly represented in this transaction. Cassandra Hayes's perfectly plucked eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. Robert Chen looked as if he'd just seen a ghost. He had clearly hoped to finalize the deal before Clara could be found and properly represented. Ms. Reed, Cassandra said, her voice like silk draped over steel. A surprise, but a welcome one. We at Nexus believe in dealing with all principals directly. She gestured to the empty chairs in the middle of the table. Please. The negotiation began. Cassandra opened with Nexus's initial offer to acquire Logicor, a staggering $900 million. Robert Chen looked ready to weep with gratitude and accept on the spot. Then Samuel Stern cleared his throat. A generous opening offer, Ms. Hayes. However, it seems to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the asset you are acquiring. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. Oh, and what might that be? You're not acquiring a logistics company, Stern said smoothly. The company is irrelevant. You are acquiring a piece of technology, a revolutionary AI that will become the central nervous system of your entire global operation. You're not buying a car, you're buying the patent for the internal combustion engine. And my client, Ms. Reed, holds the original title. The air in the room grew thick. This was the opening salvo. For the next 3 hours they battled. Cassandra's team tried to downplay the significance of Clara's patent, calling it an academic precursor. That's when Clara spoke for the first time. It's more than a precursor, Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice clear and steady. It's the heart, your own internal analysis. She slid a document across the table that Dr. Thorne had provided, an internal Nexus memo he'd acquired through academic channels. Projects that integrating Helios will increase your operational efficiency by a minimum of 40% within 3 years. That translates to an estimated profit increase of over $20 billion in the first decade alone. Cassandra Hayes was silent. Clara had just demonstrated not only that she knew the value of her technology, but that she also had access to Nexus's own confidential projections. The Shark was momentarily stunned. Clara pressed her advantage. She began to speak about Synapse, about Helios. She didn't talk about money or percentages. She talked about the code. She explained the elegance of its design, the foresight of its predictive modeling. She pointed out vulnerabilities in the current iteration and proposed solutions outlining next-generation capabilities that even Nexus's engineers hadn't considered. She wasn't a plaintiff asking for money. She was a creator explaining the value of her art. The dynamic in the room shifted irrevocably. Robert Chen and his lawyers faded into the background. This was no longer about Logicor. It was a direct negotiation between the creator Clara and the acquirer Cassandra. Cassandra Hayes, a woman who respected only strength and intelligence, was looking at Clara with a newfound grudging admiration. "What do you want, Ms. Reed?" Cassandra finally asked, cutting to the chase. Izzy leaned forward. "We are not seeking a percentage of the Logicor sale," she said crisply. "We are proposing a separate direct acquisition of Patent 7,894,561B2 and all its derivative intellectual properties. Ms. Reed will sell her stake directly to Nexus Corp. Logicor can then be acquired as a separate clean transaction." This was the masterstroke. It separated Clara's asset from the lesser company that had housed it. It made her a principal, not a passenger. Samuel Stern named their price, a number so large it seemed to hang in the air, visible and shimmering. The Nexus team balked. Cassandra Hayes claimed it was impossible. But no one left the room. For another 2 hours they hammered out the details. Numbers flew back and forth. Clauses were rewritten. The tension was immense. Finally, Cassandra Hayes stood up and extended a hand across the table to Clara. "Ms. Reed," she said, a thin smile on her lips, "it seems we have a deal." The final number they agreed upon was $1.2 billion. The signing of the documents was an almost surreal experience. Clara's hand was steady as she signed the papers that would irrevocably change her life. There was no elation, just a profound, quiet sense of vindication. The wire transfer was to be initiated within 24 hours. The next afternoon, Clara was in her apartment with Izzy. They were drinking tea, the adrenaline of the previous day having worn off, leaving them in a state of exhausted anticipation. Clara had her laptop open to her online banking portal. The balance read $4,872.14. At 3:15 p.m., she hit refresh. The screen flickered. For a heart-stopping second, the page was blank. And then the numbers appeared. $1,200.04,872.14. A tsunami of zeros. A number so vast it seemed fictional. Clara stared at the screen, her mind unable to fully comprehend the reality of what she was seeing. Izzy peered over her shoulder and her jaw dropped. "My God, Clara," she whispered. Clara didn't cheer. She didn't scream. A single tear, the twin of the one Richard had mocked, slid down her cheek. But this one was different. It wasn't born of pain or humiliation. It was a tear of release, of disbelief, of the sheer overwhelming weight of her own vindicated worth. She closed the laptop. The money was just a number on a screen. The real prize was the woman she had become to get it. The girl who loved to code, and the woman who had just conquered a titan, had finally merged into one. Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from the Wall Street Journal. Tech giant Nexus Corp acquires key AI patent from obscure engineer in deal valued at over $1.2 billion. The patent foundational to logistics AI was authored by a previously unknown Clara Reed. The story was out. The world would know her name. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that somewhere in Greenwich, Richard Sterling was about to read the headline. The reckoning was coming. Richard Sterling was having an excellent day. He had just closed a lucrative deal, and he was celebrating with Tiffany at Le Ciel, a ridiculously exclusive rooftop restaurant where the entrees cost more than most people's car payments. He felt on top of the world, the master of his universe. Tiffany was snapping a selfie of them, the city skyline sparkling behind them. Hashtag power couple, she purred, tapping away at her phone. Hashtag winning. Richard chuckled, sipping his vintage Bordeaux. He was indeed winning. He had shed his boring, unambitious wife and upgraded to a newer, more exciting model. He had his freedom, his fortune, and his status. Life was perfect. His phone vibrated on the table. A notification from his financial news app. He glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. The headline made him stop breathing. Nexus Corp acquires key AI patent from a previously unknown Clara Reed. Deal valued at over $1.2 billion. The name had to be a coincidence. It had to be. There were other Clara Reeds in the world. His Clara Reed, the woman whose greatest ambition was perfecting her lasagna recipe, couldn't possibly be involved in a billion-dollar tech deal. It was absurd. He clicked the link, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. The article loaded. And there it was. A picture of her. It was an old photo from a charity event years ago, but it was unmistakably her. The story detailed the origins of the patent and MIT thesis project from over 15 years ago. Synapse. The name hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the name. He remembered mocking it. It's a cute academic exercise, Clara. $1,000 for your magnum opus. What marketable skills do you possess? The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the pristine white tablecloth, splashing red like blood. Tiffany shrieked in annoyance. "Richard! This is couture! You ruined my dress!" He didn't hear her. He was reading the number again and again. $1,200, $1,000, $1,000. It was a number that broke his brain. It was more money than he, with all his deals and bluster, could ever dream of making. And it belonged to Clara. The smug satisfaction drained from him, replaced by a frantic, clawing panic. Their divorce settlement. The ironclad premarital asset clause he had insisted on. The patent was from before their marriage. It was hers, all of it. No, he whispered, his face ashen. No, no, no. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the narrative. He was the winner. She was the loser. He was the success. She was the charity case. This flipped the entire script. He was the fool. He had mocked her tears as she signed away her life, completely oblivious to the fact that she was sitting on a treasure chest that could buy and sell his entire existence 100 times over. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely dial her number. He had to talk to her. He had to fix this. It was community property. He had supported her. He was entitled to half. He had to be. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Her voice, calm and professional, no longer the warm, familiar tone he remembered instructed him to leave a message. He hung up and tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. He flew into a rage, shoving his chair back and storming away from the table, leaving a bewildered Tiffany behind. He drove like a madman back to the Greenwich house, his mind racing. He called his lawyer, Arthur Vance. "She hid this from me," he screamed into the phone. "She committed fraud. This was a marital asset. We have to reopen the divorce." Arthur's voice was cold and clinical. "Richard, was the patent filed before your wedding date?" "Yes, but—" "Did she ever receive income from it during the marriage that was deposited into a joint account?" "No, of course not. It was worthless." Richard yelled the words, tasting like acid in his mouth. "Then you have no claim," Arthur stated flatly. "You yourself insisted on a rigid definition of premarital property. By your own legal strategy, it is entirely hers. Trying to fight this would be career suicide. You'd be a laughingstock." Richard slammed the phone down, the reality of his monumental error crashing down on him. He had been outmaneuvered by the one person on earth he had considered his intellectual inferior. He drove to Clara's city apartment, his last desperate gambit. He would appeal to their history, their children, their shared life. He would beg if he had to. He buzzed the intercom, his heart pounding. After a long moment, a voice came through, not Clara's, but Izzy's. "Yes. Izzy, it's Richard. I need to speak to Clara. It's an emergency." "I'm sorry, Richard, but she has nothing to say to you." The intercom clicked off. He buzzed again frantically. "Please, just let me talk to her." The line opened again. This time it was Clara's voice. It was as calm and cool as a frozen lake. "Richard," she said, "what do you want?" "Clara, thank God!" He gasped, relief washing over him. "We need to talk. This money. This is our money. It's for the family. It's for the kids' futures. It's half mine. You know that's only fair." There was a long silence on the other end. He could picture her standing there in that apartment he had so magnanimously given her. "Fair," she finally said, and the word was laced with ice. "Let's talk about fair, Richard. Was it fair when you told me my life's work was a cute little game? Was it fair when you had an affair with your lawyer's niece and flaunted it for the world to see? Was it fair when you sat in that conference room and told me I had no marketable skills, that I was worth nothing more than a 2-year allowance?" Each question was a stab, and he had no defense. "Clara, I was an idiot. I was stressed. I didn't mean it," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I love you. I always have. We can fix this. We can get back together. Think of our history." A soft, mirthless laugh came through the speaker. It was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. "Our history is that you mocked my tears, Richard," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, each word precisely enunciated. "You stood on my neck and called it a victory. This isn't our money. It is my money. It was earned with my mind, a mind you did everything in your power to convince me was worthless. You are entitled to nothing. You defined the terms of our separation. Now you can live with them." She paused for a moment, letting the finality of her words sink in. "And Richard," she added, her voice devoid of all emotion, "do try to be smart with that money you have left. It's a lot less than you'll ever see again." The click of the intercom shutting off was the sound of the gates of the kingdom slamming shut in his face. He was left standing on the pavement, a beggar looking up at the castle he had once owned and foolishly thrown away. He had mocked her tears, and now those tears had watered the seeds of an empire, while he was left with nothing but the dust of his own arrogance. The news of Clara's newfound wealth and Richard's spectacular fall from grace became the stuff of Wall Street legend. He was a cautionary tale, a meme, the man who had traded $1 billion diamond for a rhinestone. His carefully constructed world crumbled with astonishing speed. His business partners, smelling the stench of his monumental misjudgment, began to distance themselves. His fair-weather friends vanished. Tiffany, upon realizing that her power couple hashtag now applied to a man who had fumbled the biggest fortune in modern history, quietly packed her designer bags and disappeared from his life, leaving nothing but a faint trace of expensive perfume in the Greenwich house. Richard was forced to sell the house, the ski lodge, the art, all to cover the debts from a lifestyle he could no longer afford. He became a ghost, a hollowed-out man haunted by the echoes of his own mockery. But this story was never truly about Richard's downfall. It was about Clara's ascent. Clara did not retreat into a life of idle luxury. The money, as staggering as it was never the point. It was the tool. It was the validation that had unlocked the final shackles on her potential. She was no longer defined by a man, a marriage, or a divorce settlement. She was defined by her own intellect and ambition. Her first major act was not to buy a yacht or a private island, but to establish a foundation. She called it the Synapse Initiative. Its mission was simple and revolutionary: to fund and mentor women and girls in STEM fields. She bought a sleek modern office building in the heart of the city, not far from the Blackwood and Finch Tower, and it became her new headquarters. The Synapse Initiative wasn't just about cutting checks. Clara was deeply personally involved. She lectured at universities, including her alma mater, MIT, inspiring a new generation of female engineers and coders. She created a venture capital arm of the foundation specifically to invest in tech startups founded by women, providing the capital and support that was so often denied to them by the male-dominated world of finance. She remembered her own experience, her brilliant idea dismissed as a cute game, and vowed that no woman with a groundbreaking idea would ever hear those words again if she could help it. She poured millions into revitalizing science and math programs in underprivileged public schools, building state-of-the-art computer labs, and funding scholarships for promising young minds who would have otherwise been left behind. She became a quiet force of nature, a philanthropist whose work wasn't about photo ops and galas, but about creating tangible, lasting change. The media clamored for interviews, but she rarely gave them. She let her work speak for itself. Her personal life also blossomed, but not in the way the gossip columns predicted. She didn't rush into the arms of a new powerful man. She had friendships, but her primary relationship was with herself and her work. She traveled the world not to lie on beaches, but to see new technologies, to meet with innovators, to expand her understanding of the world she was now helping to shape. She took Izzy with her on many of these trips, their friendship forged in the fires of the divorce, now the bedrock of her new life. One crisp autumn afternoon about a year after the Nexus deal, Clara stood on a construction site. She was wearing a hard hat over her chic bob, a blueprint spread out on the hood of a car. It was the future home of the Reed Center for Innovation, a massive campus that would serve as an incubator research facility and educational center, all under the umbrella of the Synapse Initiative. She looked at the steel skeleton of the building rising against the blue sky, a tangible symbol of the future she was building. It was a future built not on Richard's money or his approval, but on her own terms from the fruits of her own mind. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from one of the first recipients of a Synapse scholarship, a brilliant young woman from the Bronx who had just won a prestigious coding competition. The message was simple. "Thank you for believing in me, Ms. Reed. You changed my life." Clara smiled a genuine, radiant smile of pure contentment. Richard had mocked her for a single tear of pain. He had tried to reduce her to a balance sheet, to a dependent to nothing. But he had failed, because he could never understand that her true worth wasn't a number in a bank account. It was in the elegant lines of code she wrote, in the passion she had rediscovered, and in the countless lives she would now lift up with her own. She was no longer just a wife or an ex-wife. She was Clara Reed, and she was just getting started. Clara's journey wasn't a fairy tale of revenge. It was a powerful testament to the rediscovery of self-worth. She transformed the deepest betrayal into her greatest liberation. Her story proves that your value is never determined by someone else's opinion, and that the skills and passions you may have set aside are not lost, but merely waiting for the right moment to ignite and reshape your world. The billion-dollar bank account was just a side effect. Her real triumph was reclaiming her own brilliant mind and using it to build a legacy far greater than any man could tear down. She didn't just get rich. She got free. If her incredible story of transformation from tears to titan moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories of resilience and vindication. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely, in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp as a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. No one will ever want you. It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. This, Chloe said with a flourish, is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there. Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron. First, Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical," but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. "It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story, the photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair, it was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian, he's so classy, she's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe," Emma croaked. "Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Of course he did," Chloe said, her voice steely. "This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator." Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." "For Emma Vance." Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn." "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his gray eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement," Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger, so we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable, so we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the Architect of You directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality.'" A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. "In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of." Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. "This is..." This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. I am not a victim or a gold digger, the statement read. I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out. The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the Architect of You was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world. she confessed, her voice soft. He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone. Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. He was a fool, he murmured into her hair. A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse. Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. He thought it was an ending, she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work. Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.